Hello, everyone. This is the 264th episode of Soccer Nostalgia Talk Podcast. As always, this is Sean from Los Angeles and the Soccer Nostalgia blog. For this episode, I welcome back English freelance football journalist Mr. Alex Connor as we discuss Chelsea Football Club at the end of the Ken Bates era and into the beginning of the Roman Abramovich era. So from the years 2000 to 2004. Mr. Connor has a page on Substack called the Chelsea FC Connection. Welcome back, Alex.
Hi, are you okay? How you doing?
Last time we left off at the end of the 90s. So, what was the status of Chelsea in the English football landscape as we come to the millennium and the year 2000?
Say Chelsea are at a very respectable status for like modern football fans listening. I'd say we're at about like an Aston Villa level of like a very respectable team who are serious top four contenders, but still not quite got like the squad depth or quality to be like a title winning team, especially back then with the quality of Arsenal and Man United. Like they had monopoly over the Premier League at that time. But Chelsea, and this is probably fair, were kind of considered a bit of a cup team, which I think is probably about a fair estimate of it, really. Like in 2000 they won the FA Cup against Aston Villa at the last FA Cup final at the old Wembley. They beat Aston Villa 1-0 and Roberto Di Matteo scored. So that's the kind of level that Chelsea are at, really. Like kind of, I mean, they had like a string of, like we spoke about in the last episode. They kind of won like a string of cups at the end of the 90s. So I'd say, yeah, they were at like a respectable level, but not quite at the level to challenge for like a league title.
But they were a fashionable team that would actually spend a lot of money on players.
Yeah, they still, I think, given the location in West London and the history of the club, they were still a very attractive proposition. And like we said last time, they kind of led the charge, perhaps, like an influx of like European and international stars from other nations to come. Like Chelsea's team, as we approach 2000, is still full of like a lot of international stars. I mean, they had Marcel Desailly and Frank Leboeuf at centre back. Like both won the World Cup with France. Graham Lasso, we had Di Matteo, Zola, Poyet. So they still had a very diverse team, and they were obviously managed by Vialli as well, who used to be obviously play for Chelsea, and he was an adored figure at Chelsea. So they had him as well. And then he became manager. So that kind of further endorsed the kind of like multicultural image of Chelsea. So I'd say, yeah, it's a very like fashionable and sophisticated time for Chelsea, I would say.
Yeah, and other names I would add Italian goalkeeper Carlo Cudicini and the Dutch backup goalkeeper Ed De Hoy,
Mm,
Spanish defender Albert Ferrer, Nigerian defender Celestine Babayaro. You still have Dan Petrescu, the Romanian defender. So,
great
uh,
player, great
yeah.
player.
So many big names. Even George Weah, the
Mm,
Liberian striker, had a short stint at that year with Chelsea. Last time we talked about Chelsea chairman Ken Bates. We are
mm.
nearing the end of his time with the club in this decade. How is he regarded now that Chelsea were in a different status?
Okay, like I think, like we said in the last episode, Ken Bates is a very polarizing figure. Like at the end of the day, like the success that he achieved in that time, like is a success. You can't change that. And at the end of the day, like Chelsea are compared to the club that he took over in the 80s, like Chelsea are a completely different team and completely different entity that is far more attractive, far more successful. But I think, and rightfully so, people will never forget some of the things he said, and he was always throughout his time a very controversial figure, an outspoken figure that kind of a lot of fans struggled to relate to. But I think one thing that was the issue by the end of his tenure is that Chelsea were in a lot of debt. Like I think Chelsea were in about around £100 million worth of debt and like relying on short bank loans. And because of like the influx of all these big names, like we've just discussed earlier, like Chelsea were obviously paying a lot for wages, paying a lot for players to come over. So they weren't exactly working on a budget, shall we say. So by that point, I think Chelsea were kind of on their knees financially, really. And then in 2003, at the end of the season, they played Liverpool in the last game of the season, and both teams were fighting for Champions League. Like whoever won that match got Champions League, and then obviously Chelsea won. And there was a guy who played for Chelsea, quite a forgettable name apart from this goal, called like Jasper Gronkaya, and he
Yes.
scored the winning goal, and obviously that got Chelsea Champions League, and then from there, Abramovich took over really, and like as we know, like the rest is kind of history with that.
Let's look at the 2000-2001 season. We mentioned George Weah, so he leaves. He ends up at Manchester City. Chris Sutton, who had been an expensive flop, he joins Celtic and he had a new lease on life there. Dan Petrescu left Chelsea to join Bradford. French midfielder, current national team manager Didier Deschamps also spent a year at Chelsea, but
Mm.
he at this point he joined Spanish side Valencia. Later on, you have the Norwegian striker Tor André Flo leaving the club, joining Rangers. As far as the arrivals, we have the Croatian midfielder Mario Stanic from Parma, Italian defender Christian Panucci from Inter, who later in the season would join French side Monaco. Dutch striker Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank arrived from Atletico Madrid, very good pickup. Icelandic striker Eidur Gudjohnsen arrived from Bolton Wanderers. A certain Dutch defender, Winston Bogarde, arrived from Barcelona. More about him later. Yeah. The player you mentioned, Jesper Gronkjær, he arrived from Ajax, the Danish midfielder. Later in the year, you have the Australian goalkeeper Mark Bosnich arriving from Manchester United. But this 2000-2001 season started out poorly, and already by September 12th, after 5 matches, Gianluca Vialli was sacked, and he would be replaced by another Italian manager, Claudio Ranieri. Despite his sacking, Gianluca Vialli's impact at the club had been significant, not only as a player, but now as a player manager as well.
Well, I think first things to say is that obviously I think all Chelsea fans, obviously I wasn't alive when he first joined Chelsea, but I hear it from my dad and I see it online. Like people absolutely, like Chelsea fans love Gianluca Vialli for like what he did as a player and as a manager at Chelsea. He was brilliant, brilliant player, brilliant manager. Like did probably quite underrated really, and did like arrived at Chelsea with like a lot of pedigree as well. Like he'd been at Juventus, like Sampdoria, like scoring loads of goals in Italy. So he was a really kind of like well-renowned player. And so he came to Chelsea and he won the FA Cup. He won that FA Cup I was mentioning earlier. He won the Cup Winners' Cup. He did really well with Chelsea. Like he kind of leveled because in the mid 90s Chelsea were very mid-table. But then him and Hullet kind of elevated Chelsea up a few levels to become like a team challenging for the top four and also a team winning trophies. Because obviously Chelsea played in the FA Cup final in 1994 against Man United and lost 4-0. They got absolutely demolished. So then to go, he was part of the group that then won it in 97 and then managed the group that won it in 2000. So he's very, very well remembered and Chelsea fans love him. And like, the kind of thing, I think getting sacked from a job for any manager now, I don't even look at it as kind of most of the time, I don't really look at it as a reflection of the manager because it happens all the time, really. But I think like things change, and I think probably at the time it was maybe the time for a right appointment. Like I remember that season wasn't the best start, but I think that obviously despite that, I think obviously fans still absolutely love him. I don't think there's any bad feeling really between either party. And like, obviously he passed away, I think about 3, 4 years ago, I think he passed away. So when that happened as well, like there's a lot of tributes paid out to him because I think everyone really loved and valued him at the club, which is a good thing. So I don't think there was any kind of bad, not like other Chelsea managers that have left in horrendous circumstances. I think his was a bit more, there's still a lot of love and respect between both parties, I would say.
Well, it was too late as far as honors. How did Ranieri redress the situation to allow Chelsea to finish a respectable sixth position?
I think, like you were saying earlier, that 2000 summer was quite important. Like, I think obviously the signing of Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank was a big one. Like, he was a brilliant player for Chelsea. I didn't actually realize that he came from Atletico Madrid as well. I had no idea he played for Atletico Madrid, but he was brilliant for Chelsea. I think Idiger Johnston's another one, really underrated player, really like underrated player. I think he stayed at Chelsea for 6 years, but obviously he came in 2000 as well. And then also, like you mentioned earlier, you reminded me, Carlo Cudicini, who I think also goes under the radar quite a lot because obviously Czech comes in 2004, and Czech is like the best goalkeeper around in the Premier League history. And then obviously a lot of players, yeah, so we signed all those players and he kind of stabilizes the defense. He's a bit more, because Chelsea are kind of competing all fronts, and as you'll probably know as well. Like Ranieri used to change his lineup a lot, which was something that kind of in English football wasn't really, like teams would kind of stick to a rotation of like 13 to 14 players.
The
Kind of
Tinker
Ranieri
Man.
kind of like, yeah, the Tinker Man. He would, but I think you kind of do. I think there is obviously a fine line with it, and sometimes people change too many things. So I think it's definitely a thing you need to rotate kind of like as much as you can. So he kind of came in and did that, like tightened up defense, tightened up the organization. And I always think in like most, in like 80% of managerial cases, like you kind of always get like a bit of, have you ever heard of like a new manager bounce? Yeah, so you always kind of get like a bit of like a new manager like feeling. Like the players always want to impress, and if like the players like the manager, they always want to impress him. And obviously, I think as you kind of see, like Ranieri's like a very like likable figure. So yeah, he came in, stabilised, tightened up the defence. We had a good transfer window that he took advantage of in the previous summer. Yeah, he did really well.
And this was the season where John Terry really established himself as a Chelsea regular. What was his status at this point, and was it self-evident that he would become a leader in the near future? And in fact, how important was it to have an English presence at the club?
I think it was good, really, because obviously Chelsea had relied upon at this time. I think LeBeouf had just left, and then obviously Desailly's there, but Desailly's like into his 30s now. There's obviously not a player that's going to be there for like many more years. So I think there's definite need to kind of like look at the centre back position and kind of get someone in who can stay and be a figurehead of the team. 'Cause I think you look at every successful Premier League team, and they've always got one centre back that kind of like stays throughout it. Like now you've got Van Dijk, like before you had Company, Rio Ferdinand's another one, like Tony Adams. For like all the top teams have always had like one centre back, or sometimes two, but more often than not one that stays throughout like a whole era at the club. So there's definitely a need for it. And like LeBeouf left in 2001. So that kind of really opened up a gap for it. And like John Terry was like a very like coveted youngster. Like a lot of like his family are all West Ham fans. Like I know he had a trial. I think it was like Arsenal Man United. But then in the 90s, he said he picked Chelsea because it just felt right for him. So he kind of came in really young, exciting talent, like breath of fresh air, like very confident. He's communicating, obviously very brave in his challenges as well. And I think it was a very transformative time for John Terry, because not even just in the centre back position, but like a lot of other players left as well during this time. Like in 2001, I think I've got it written down here. You had Poyet, Wise, Zola, Di Matteo, Lasso, all kind of left around that time. LeBeouf, obviously, as well, all kind of left throughout that time. So it's a very kind of era-defining time, really, for Chelsea. And kind of John Terry kind of stepped in and really, and again, like the rest is kind of history of what he did at the club. And it's definitely one of the best players at the club as well.
One of the new arrivals that I mentioned was the Dutch defender Winston Bogarde. Can you walk us through what would become a farcical situation?
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I think it was obviously he was signed and he came to the Premier League with like good footballing pedigree. Like he'd been at Barcelona, he played a lot for the Dutch national team. So they'd signed like a pretty well-established player and then given him a very long and lucrative contract. But obviously he arrived in 2000 and then under Vialli, but then obviously Vialli got sacked and then Ranieri comes in. Ranieri's looked at him and thought, I don't really fancy playing him. But then I think, in fairness to Winston Bogart, like if a club gives you a contract and you sign it, like you're entitled to that contract. Like it's the club's fault. Like it was, I think it's more of a symbol of poor recruitment and poor management at the top to give a player that long of a contract who you weren't sure about, and then who's like uh, coming towards the end of his career maybe as well, and then sack the manager and. They tried to make him leave. He didn't want to leave, and I think it's fair enough, really. Like the club had given him the contract, and then they tried to put him in the reserve team, and they tried to make him leave as much as they could. But he knew he wasn't. I mean, he said in multiple interviews. I think he said he wasn't going to get this kind of money and contract anywhere else. Like, why would he give it up? I think he was on about 40 grand a week, 30, 40 grand a week. So he's obviously not going to give that up, is he? So, yeah, I don't really think it's a reflection on him. I think it's more of a reflection on the poor recruitment strategy in that move, and then obviously on Ken Bates. I mean, Abramovich should do a lot of that kind of stuff himself, obviously, but yeah, I think it's more of a, I'd say it's more of a reflection on the club, really, and a very frustrating situation, but it is what it is, I think. And they had a lot of other quality defenders to help smooth over the cracks, I would say. But I think it was kind of a lesson for Chelsea, really, in kind of future transfer dealings to kind of be a bit more careful and do a bit more research on things.
We come to the 2001 2002 season. You have the likes of Dennis Wise, a legend at the club, joining Leicester. Gus Poyet, the Uruguayan midfielder, joined Tottenham. You mentioned Frank Leboeuf, the French defender, joined Olympique Marseille. As far as the arrivals, we have Dutch forward Boudewijn Zenden from Barcelona, who came in with French midfielder Emmanuel Petit, who was at Barcelona, former Arsenal star. You have the significant arrival of a young Frank Lampard from West Ham United, and also French defender William Gallas, who went in the opposite direction. He came from Olympique Marseille, and Leboeuf went to Marseille. You also have Finnish striker Mikael Forsell coming back from his loan from Crystal Palace. This 2001 2002 season, Chelsea had a solid season, finishing sixth, but they just fell short of qualifying for the Champions League. They did reach the final of the FA Cup, but they lost to the double winning Arsenal side of Arsene Wenger. Nevertheless, was it still considered satisfaction that Chelsea were finishing near the top, or do you think much more was being expected by now?
It's a tricky one because I'd say, like, obviously, Man United and Arsenal, there's still a big gap between them and Chelsea. So it was tricky, really. And the squad is going like a lot of, undergoing a lot of change at this point as well. I think it's really also tricky because you kind of know that the Ken Bates era is coming to an end as well. And I think there's kind of a sort of feeling at Chelsea where they reached their ceiling under Ken Bates and with this group of players and in this era. So I think everyone kind of knew that there was a big change need, like a big revamp needed if Chelsea are kind of going to get up the levels to where they wanted to be. So I think kind of from the fan perspective, I think fans were quite content at where the club were because I think that's everyone kind of knew that's about where they were. And then like you said earlier, they kind of like lost. Obviously, like people like Dennis Wise and Zola like were replaced in the end by other brilliant players, but kind of at the time you didn't know that was going to happen. Like Chelsea did well to replace these players, but like at the time, it's very like I mean, in the modern era, Chelsea haven't replaced these kind of players, so in back then you didn't know that was going to happen. So I think Chelsea were doing about where they should be, really. And yeah, I think there was kind of like a general feeling that the Ken Bates era had done all it could do for Chelsea, and there was still that gap between Chelsea and then the top teams to kind of bridge before they could kind of think about winning like the major trophies.
Another legend of a club, Frank Lampard, joined the club that season, and he would form the English base of the club into the next decade along with John Terry. How important of an addition was he for the club as he joined when another legend, Dennis Wise, had departed?
For me personally, like he's in my like top three like favorite, like him, Drogba, and Hazard are my three favorite Chelsea players, like of my lifetime, really. Like it was an interesting one for Lampard because he initially came through at West Ham, and I don't know if you've seen the video because he was managed at West Ham by his uncle, Harry Redknapp, and they're doing like a press conference, and
Oh
Harry
yeah,
Redknapp,
there's a famous
yeah, obviously
video.
playing him a
Yeah.
lot. And all the reporters, obviously, it kind of looks a bit like nepotism, really, like he's being favoured because he's the nephew of Harry Redknapp. And Harry Redknapp does this really like passionate speech of, oh, he's gonna like make it one day, kind of thing. And obviously, he does, and he comes to Chelsea, and he and John Terry kind of symbolise Chelsea for the next decade, really. I don't think there's really words to describe kind of how important he was for Chelsea and the kind of also like the amount of goals that he scored is just like absolutely nuts, really. Like to score that like amount of goals, I just like I said, I don't really think there's words to kind of like describe how good he was. And then obviously he comes in for Dennis Wise, but he's like a very different player to Dennis Wise, obviously, because like Dennis Wise was not this effective in front of goal, but obviously had a lot more qualities as well. But yeah, I think of all the signings that Chelsea made under Abramovich, I think those two previously, where you got John Terry when he was younger and then Frank Lampard from West Ham, you'd probably say those are the two most like transformative of players really. And yeah, Lampard's Lampard. Like he just is. He's incredible.
We come to the 2002-2003 season, which would turn out to be the last of the Ken Bates era at the club. The transfer activity is rather light. You have actually the Italian midfielder Samuel Dall'Abona going back to Italy, joining AC Milan. You have the Georgian midfielder Rati Alexidze joining Dynamo Tbilisi. Later in the season, you have Mikel Forsell being loaned to Borussia Mönchengladbach. As far as the arrivals, you have Gabriel Ambrosetti coming back from his loan at Vicenza. So, yeah, you can see that there's not that much money for transfers. But this is the season where you mentioned earlier Chelsea achieved the Champions League qualification with a final day win over direct rival Liverpool to finish fourth. And in this way, Ken Bates' era ended on as a high. So Chelsea defeated Liverpool 2-1 with Desai and Gronkcher scoring and just made it into the Champions League. But as you can see, the transfer activity was rather light, and this was an indication of Chelsea's debts. So, one way or another, getting into the Champions League was paramount.
Oh, it was absolutely kind of crucial. As I mentioned earlier, like I've got it on my notes here, that Chelsea were in around like £100 million worth of debt due to kind of like the spending that they'd done in the 90s, bringing in all those like international players. And then like by the 2000s, they were kind of like relying on short-term bank loans, which are also generating a lot of interest as well. So Chelsea, just before Abramovich took over, like Chelsea were in such a precarious financial position. Also, like another important point, which I forgot to mention earlier, is that the stadium was tied up with the Chelsea pitch owners, which meant that which protected the grounds but reduced like the club's ability to leverage it financially. They couldn't really make money off that either. So it was a really it's a really difficult time. And I think if Abramovich hadn't come in, Chelsea would have had to have done a really big kind of like rethink. They would have probably had to have sold a lot of players for big, like all the best players, obviously for big money to do that. But then obviously Abramovich comes in and kind of with the level of money he has, like kind of obviously eradicates all that debt and all that worry. And then obviously like another big point is the Champions League. So you kind of like the best case scenario was qualify for the Champions League and then Abramovich takes over. And then the worst case scenario was don't qualify for the Champions League and then Ken Bates stays and you have to sell all your players. So kind of Chelsea,
It could have been a Leeds United situation.
yeah,
Who
who
is
knows?
that?
It could
Yeah.
have really like unraveled and snowballed, and it probably may have had to have sold Lampard. And God, I don't even want to think about it. I don't even know who they could have sold him to, but it was kind of like a sliding doors moment, really. And luckily, Chelsea got the better end of the deal, and then Abramovich comes in and then has this just like unprecedented amount of money and is able to sign just like yeah, just able to eradicate the debts and sign whoever he wanted, really. Yeah, it's a very important time for Chelsea, and they got lucky. But yeah, like the kind of it worked out for the club, and yeah, so it was brilliant.
So this is in July 2003. Given the debts, Ken Bates has to sell the club, so he sells it to an oligarch, Roman Abramovich, that I don't believe many people knew who he was at this point. How was this process and the reaction of the fans at home? Were they just happy that someone was wiping the debt clean?
Yeah, I think it is. I think so, like you said, like new era, like no one had a clue who he was. He wasn't like a football man. He was just a very rich businessman. Obviously, the fans have just seen like someone come in with loads of money. It's like happy days, really. Like I don't really think there's like a crazy. Like, I think fans, especially, like you know, what it's like now. It's like there's background in everyone now because like the way the internet is and stuff. But like, I think back then, like no one really knew about him. And I think the answer is kind of as simple as that. Like fans weren't really thinking like, oh, like, who, like doing research into him, being like, oh, who's this bloke? They just saw kind of someone with a lot of money who was willing to come in and save Chelsea and transform Chelsea, which is what he did. I don't know if we'll talk about it, but like the money that he spent in that 2003 window was absolutely insane compared to like what Chelsea had spent in the past. So it just kind of showed like how much money he had really.
Yeah, so it was an end of an era, and you had Gianfranco Zola, one of the emblematic players of this Chelsea era. He left at the end of the season to go back to Italy, to Sardinia. What had been his impact at the club?
Yeah, he's another one who's just like I think like stood out in especially the Chelsea team at that time, just as like the most like, technically gifted brilliant footballer, like the skills and like the goals. Like he scored one goal against Wimbledon where he like chopped it, and then I don't even know how to describe it, but he kind of like chopped it and sold like the whole defense and scored. He had this scored this flick against Norwich that I remember. He scored this lob at Stamford Bridge. Like his catalogue of goals just incredible, and like to kind of like have a player like that come to Chelsea because he could have easily played for a team challenging for league titles, but he spent 7 years at Chelsea, was just phenomenal and kind of like stood out in the Premier League as just like an incredibly like technically gifted footballer that like the league there wasn't even at Arsenal Man United there wasn't like a load of these kind of like flair attackers around really, and he was kind of like the Hazard before Hazard. I think like I always say that like Zola and Hazard are probably the two most like technically gifted like special footballers that Chelsea have ever had. So yeah, he was just absolutely incredible. Like the way he played and the goals, like he scored against Stuttgart in the, I think it was in the Cup Winners' Cup
Yeah, the
in,
1998 final of the
and
Cup
he
Winners'
like so
Cup.
he
Yeah.
scored like important goals as well. And he also won, like he obviously won that Cup Winners' Cup. He won the League Cup. He won two FA Cups as well. And I think there's like a stat about him where he's the first player to because he didn't join in the summer. He joined in the November. I think it's a stat where it's like he's the first player to win like PFA Player of the Year or something, where he didn't play the whole season. Like so he only played and he won like an award and he's just brilliant. But he also like came from like when he was a youngster. he was with Maradona at
Oh
Napoli. So he
yes,
obviously,
yes.
he used to like practice free kicks together. And then obviously he's quite small and diminutive in his stature as well. So I'm not saying he is like Maradona, but you know what I mean? He kind of like had that education, had that kind of company when he was younger. But yeah, brilliant player. And I say anyone who hasn't watched him to just get our YouTube up highlights of him and just sit back and enjoy it because he was a very special footballer.
Indeed. And in general, many of the old guard departed that summer, such as Lassa, Jody Morris, De Hoy, among others. Was this also a telling sign?
Oh yeah, definitely. It was the rebuild, like I was saying earlier, it's the kind of the rebuild that Chelsea needed if they wanted to kind of get to the next level. This was the rebuild that they needed. And I think they kind of needed to be ruthless with it, really. Like these are still good players, but they weren't the players to kind of take you. Obviously, they were better back in the day, but obviously some of them were towards like, the end of their careers. So it was the rebuild that Chelsea needed, really. And then I'm sure we'll talk about the Abramovich transfers later on. But yeah, I think it was definitely a sign of it was kind of that ruthlessness that Abramovich has become so famed for. But like I said, Chelsea required it and it paid off, obviously, as well.
So, in the immediate, was there belief that good times would come back fast, or were the fans a little patient at this point?
I think there was a lot of expectation. I think there was a lot of, I think after seeing kind of the transfer window in that 2003 summer where Chelsea have signed Joe Cole, Damien Duff, Varane, Makelele, like to kind of name a few, Jeremy as well. Like there was, I think after the transfer window, people were then like, wow, like this is then like Chelsea should be challenging for the title now, like considering like all the players that they got rid of and the players that they bought in, it's like Chelsea are like a really serious club. So I think given the money spent and the transfer, I think there was definitely expectation that Chelsea would kind of go on to do something, which is kind of shown by how he sacked Ranieri at the end of that season because he wanted more. So yeah, I think there was definitely expectation from everyone, really.
Yeah, so for this first season as chairman 2003 2004, Abramovich he maintained Claudio Ranieri in place but spent on many high quality transfers. You have the likes of Gianfranco Zola going back to Italy to Cagliari, Jody Morris joined Leeds, Graham Lassalle joined Southampton, Ed De Hoy joined Stoke City. You have later Budavin Zendan would join Middlesbrough. As far as the arrivals, you have the Cameroon midfielder Jeremy from Middlesbrough, Glenn Johnson from West Ham, Damien Duff, the Irish winger from Blackburn Rovers, Wayne Bridge, defender from Southampton. You have Juan Sebastian Veron, Argentine midfielder coming from Manchester United, which was one of the marquee signings that season, along with Joe Cole from West Ham. You have the Romanian striker Adrian Mutu arriving from Parma. Argentine striker Hernan Crespo arrived from Inter. Later, you have Claude Makelele, the French midfielder, joining from Real Madrid. In the new year, you even have Scott Parker coming from Charlton Athletic. So it's a major facelift for Chelsea.
Mm.
So, with all these signings, was there already talk about the title, or were Manchester United and Arsenal still seen to be the main favorites for any league title?
I think Man United and Arsenal are still the favourites. Obviously, like I think the 03-04 season was when Arsenal went invincible. So you're kind of like obviously like they were definitely the two favourites and were still ahead of Chelsea at that time. But Chelsea had definitely massively kind of like decreased the gap as well. I mean, from those signings we just mentioned, like I mean, Makelele from Real Madrid was an absolutely massive signing. Like he obviously like defined the position, was incredible for Real Madrid. Like Crespo had an incredible career. So for him to come to Chelsea as well was another one where it was like, wow, like that is a huge signing. And you've also got Veron, which didn't work out at the time, but he was another one where it's like, oh my God, like that's another like massive, massive signing. Joe Cole and Damien Duff as well, another two like very like Premier League established players. Like, Jeremy, Glenn Johnston, Wayne Bridge are all like solid defensive additions as well. So I think Chelsea, like obviously they probably more than half decreased the gap to Arsenal and Man United, I'd say. But there was still, I think just because you sign a load of players at once doesn't necessarily mean that like you get the success straight away. And I also think another key point is that they didn't have obviously Mourinho at this point either. It was still Ranieri, and I think maybe you kind of say that Ranieri had done all he could with Chelsea by this point as well, I think. So another key point would be the manager. And then I think once Mourinho then wins the Champions League with Porto, then they get him in. And I think then there is real expectation of, right, Chelsea should win something. And then also you kind of got, with Arsenal especially, they did that invincible season. And then they kind of have like, that's kind of like their end of era kind of moment, really, in the sense of like they then have to like they have a massive kind of like with the move to Emirates as well. They have like a massive rebuild in terms of their squad and like a lot of their like massive players and leave to go to other clubs. So yeah, I think there was expectation of Chelsea to do well, but maybe not necessarily win the league in Abramovich's first season, I would say.
In 2003, you also have the arrival of the executive Peter Kenyon from Manchester United. How important was this?
I think that was another massive signing as well. I think people probably underestimate how important it is behind the scenes of getting big players in and like getting big figures in behind the scenes at a club and kind of Kenyon played a big role at Man United, like taking over from Martin Edwards, and he was kind of sometimes criticised at Man United for spending a lot on like he kind of like wiped out their wage structure and spent big. Like, he spent big on Veron initially at Man United, and then he also signed Rio Ferdinand as well. So he liked to spend big, really. So he kind of suited the Chelsea model under Abramovich, where you were able to kind of sign big players on big wages. And like, given his standing in professional football, it was obviously for Chelsea to convince anyone from Man United to come over to the club back then was a massive, massive thing, given like Man United's status as the best, like the biggest club in the world. So it was a massive, massive thing for Chelsea. And obviously at his time, like Peter Kenyon did a lot for Chelsea, not even just at the very start, like he was heavily involved in the Ashley Cole transfer. He tried to convince Sven-Goran Eriksson, who was the England manager at the time, to come over as well. So he was like a huge, he wasn't afraid to get his opinion across, I think. And like I said, for Chelsea to get someone from Man United at that time, I think that was like a massive, massive statement from the club.
Getting back to this 2003-2004 season, it's the year of the Invincibles with Arsenal winning the title. But Chelsea with Ranieri finished runners up, which I don't think many people would have expected. But like we said, this was still not enough to save Ranieri's job. And let's also remember that Chelsea also reached the semifinals of the Champions League. In fact, eliminating Arsenal along the way, and until they were eliminated by Monaco in the semifinals. So it was a solid season all around, but not enough to save Ranieri's job. Do you think Abramovich sought a different manager all along?
Yeah, I think so, but it's tricky when you come into a club because you can't like if you rip everything up and it doesn't go well, you kind of look a bit silly. Like you look at the current Chelsea ownership, like they came in, ripped everything up, then got rid of Tuchel within like a month of the new season, got Potter in, and we came 12th. So like there is a I think probably Abramovich is thinking if you revamp the squad and the manager, it doesn't go well. That kind of paints a really bad picture of you, and you instantly the fans aren't on sides. And also, I think Ranieri had done well. It wasn't like a bad. He's a really good manager. Like he did well for Chelsea. So I don't think there's any reason to kind of sack him initially. But I think it's just kind of a simple thing of like managerial appointments come to an end naturally. And I think kind of Ranieri had done all he could for Chelsea. And I think given Abramovich's investment and him coming to the club, I just think it signaled a new era for Chelsea. They needed kind of like a fresh ideas. They really needed someone to kind of challenge Arsenal and Man United and take advantage of their rebuilds, really. And like Chelsea needed to find the next up and coming kind of big coach in Europe, and that was Mourinho. But I also think for Ranieri, like a massive point is how you mentioned about the Champions League. I think Abramovich always wanted to win. Obviously, the Premier League and Champions League are the big two, and by this point, Chelsea hadn't won either of them. But I think that Champions League campaign was massive fault for Ranieri because they'd done the hard part, obviously beating Arsenal in the quarterfinals, like the Invincibles. They beat them in the quarterfinals, and you're looking at a semi-final with Monaco, and you're thinking like Chelsea should really kind of could really do something here. But I don't think to lose to Monaco, I think everyone was really frustrated with that. And I think it was kind of looked at as a massive opportunity missed, really. Not to throw any shade at Monaco or Porto, but obviously normally the Champions League, you're looking at clubs like back then like Real Madrid, Barcelona, like or some of the Italian clubs like AC Milan and all like so I think for all of them to be out there was a real opportunity for Chelsea to capitalise and they didn't, which I think backfired on Ranieri as well. And I think Abramovich's ambition eventually took over, and I think a change at that point was the right decision.
As you mentioned earlier, during that same season, there were rumors that the England national team manager Sven-Goran Eriksson would manage the club for the following season. How was that received by the fans?
I don't think they're especially kind of excited by it, to be honest, from like people that from my dad. I spoke to my asked my dad, and I don't think there was like a big kind of excitement really. I think fans are definitely more intrigued and excited by the idea of Mourinho. Because obviously, I think alongside winning the Champions League, Mourinho kind of had that confidence and that self-assuredness that fans love. So I don't think there's especially big excitement for Sven-Goran Eriksson, to be honest. Like, especially, he was a good manager, but I don't think he would have been the man to kind of elevate Chelsea to the level they wanted to be elevated to, really, I think. Like, 'cause he didn't exactly, he did okay in England, but I wouldn't say he wasn't like especially fantastic, really, at England. He was obviously very good at Lazio, and was a brilliant, brilliant manager at Lazio. But I think at that point in his career, when he was at England, it was kind of winding down, really. I think if Chelsea had got him a few years earlier, instead of when they got Ranieri, I think that would have made a lot more sense. But I think at the time, I don't think it got like a crazy reception, really. Like I said, they got him in 2000 after he won Serie A and was named Serie A Coach of the Year. I think then there would have been a bit more kind of excitement. But I think at the time, I don't also think that obviously people are very passionate about the national team. I don't think that would have been received very well if Chelsea then gone and pinched the England national team manager the year before, or the year of, or the year before the Euros. So I think it worked out for all parties, really. I think it was the best, yeah, the best scenario happened, the best outcome happened.
So, as we reach the end of this season, Chelsea are about to embark on its greatest era as a club. Was it a certainty at this point as far as the fans are concerned?
I think there was definitely a feeling of like it's going to happen eventually. There's that kind of mentality, really, like it has, given like the level of investment and given like who Chelsea signed and like the way the squad was improving. Like I said earlier about how Arsenal and Man United were also going through periods of transition as well. I think there was definitely an expectancy and like fans knew it was coming. And after that 2004 window where Chelsea signed the likes of like Carvalho, Drogba, Robben, Cech, like it was another like massive, massive summer for Chelsea that already added on to players like Makelele, Joe Cole, Lampard, Terry. I think like fans knew it was a matter of time that Chelsea were just spending like unprecedented money compared to other clubs, and then also went and got the coach that just won the Champions League as well, who was a European champion. So I think kind of there's a massive excitement around the club because they knew that a title was coming eventually. And after finishing second in the previous season as well, I think everyone knew it was a matter of time. And then obviously they won the two in a row, which was good. So yeah, I think there was definitely excitement, expectation amongst the fans. And I think if Chelsea hadn't won the league in 2004, 2005, I think there definitely would have been questions asked, really.
So this is really the point where the team perhaps changes status as a cup team to a serious challenger.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Definitely a club that should be challenging for Premier League, challenging for all trophies, like challenging for Premier League, Champions League, FA Cup, all of it. I think definitely like the level of the squad and the players and like players, all players were signed in their prime as well. Like Carvalho, Drogba, Robben, Cech were all right in their prime and ready to like kind of come in straight away. I mean, Carvalho and Ferreira, who were signed in 2004, were both part of Mourinho's Champions League winning side at Porto. And all these players were signed to definitely either be on the bench or be in the starting 11. And I also think the 2004 kind of summer, like, you know how we spoke about in the 2000s when Ranieri came, there was a bit of a rebuild. Well, I also think in 2004, there was also a massive rebuild in terms of like Chelsea got rid of a lot of players in that window. Like I'm looking at it now, and they got rid of Bogard, Veron, Forsell, Petit, Desai, Gronkaya, Stanic, Carlton Cole. So there was a massive, massive rebuild in 2004, and the squad has dramatically improved, I think. So, yeah, and I think luckily for Chelsea and Abramovich, they absolutely stormed the league that season. It all worked out quite well.
And of course, it's not just spending money on players, as important as that is, but as an organization, Chelsea had also changed behind the scenes. Was it seen at the time a welcome development that another club was challenging the Manchester United Arsenal duopoly, or was there some worry for the amount of money spent? Were people cautious about that?
Yeah, to be honest with you, I wouldn't say it was welcomed the Chelsea research, like the Chelsea rise, because obviously it wasn't kind of done in the most kind of respectable or ethical manner, shall we say, to put it politely. And Chelsea kind of came in, completely ripped up the script, and spent an unprecedented money on transfers. And ultimately, these transfers and these players are the ones that powered Chelsea to those two Premier League titles. I think obviously, like it's nice to have a change of not having Arsenal or Man United win the league. I think obviously everyone hated Man United because of how good they were, and then Arsenal. I think Wenger kind of ruffled a lot of feathers in English football because the way he kind of spoke in the media and all his new ideas and things. I don't think other fans particularly kind of like latched on to him. So I think it's obviously nice to have a new winner, but I don't think people like the fact it was Chelsea because of the way that they did it. I don't think it was especially welcomed as well. They were kind of like these new rich kids on the block that kind of burst onto the scene and then just spent an unprecedented amount of money, like saw all the best players and kind of cherry picked them. But yeah, I'll have this one. And that obviously this happened for the whole Abramovich era, but especially I think all of Abramovich's best business happened in those first like 2 or 3 years, you'd say. Like, he obviously spent a lot throughout his time, but I think in like a lot more misses after that. But but I say that, like I think another interesting point about it is even in this time that Chelsea signed like a lot of brilliant players, that they also spent a lot of money on players that didn't necessarily work out. I mean, they signed Thiago, who only stayed for one season. He was good in that season, but he only stayed for one season.
Yeah, Mateja
Won the league.
Kezman, he was another
Kesman
high
was
profile
another
signing,
one.
didn't do much. Yeah.
It was poor. You kind of got Veron in the previous season, who didn't do much, was poor and left. So like Chelsea had a lot of hits with their transfers, but it's because they were spending so much and because they had so much money, they were able to have kind of these misses really. And like you kind of look at it, like a lot was spent on Glenn Johnson. He didn't really hit the heights. That was a huge fee on Veron. Like Scott Parker was another one, like massive fee. He didn't cement himself at all at Chelsea and left after a season. So kind of like Chelsea were able to get out of jail because of how much money that they had, and they were able to kind of make mistakes in the transfer market, really. So yeah, I think it wasn't like the most feel-good story of how they kind of built it up over. I mean, like you look at Arsenal, like this season, for example, if they win it. I know they've spent a lot of money, but it's kind of been a building process of since Arteta's been there over the last, what, 7, 8 years, of kind of like this building of the squad and things. It's kind of been this, it's been quite slow, but I feel like they'll obviously feel quite rewarded when they win it. Whereas like Chelsea, it was kind of this like bang, like sign this player, this player, this player. Kind of doesn't matter if we don't, doesn't matter if that player doesn't work out, so then we'll sign this player. So it was kind of a bit more rushed. And they were able to make a lot of mistakes, really. So I don't think it was especially viewed by most fans that positively.
So, in closing, what is the legacy of this Chelsea of the pre Abramovich era, just after the millennium? So, how are these years regarded by the club historians?
They love it, really, I think. They absolutely love it. I think like it was a very iconic time for Chelsea, given that the players they had, like Uzolas, Di Matteo, Hullet, Vialli, Desailly, LeBeuf. Like, it's a brilliant time for Chelsea to kind of attract those kind of like international superstars. 'Cause Chelsea had like a very distinct identity in the sense of like these players were kind of coming to Chelsea in the latter stage of the career, but still had a lot to offer. And I think like at that time as well, Chelsea, because they didn't have a lot of success, they didn't have any success in the 80s and or the early 90s. Chelsea kind of embraced their status as a cup team because it meant winning trophies. And at that stage of the club's journey and development, it was a good thing. And like winning the FA Cup was a great feeling. And like fans absolutely love it. Like when they won the FA Cup in '97, that was the end of a 27-year trophy drought. The last time Chelsea won a trophy was when they won the FA Cup in 1970. So for a whole generation or more of fans had never seen Chelsea win a trophy. So to then win, and then obviously in England, the FA Cup is like one of the holy grails. Like fans absolutely worship that trophy. So it was amazing for Chelsea to win that. And then also, obviously, I know the Cup Winners' Cup's not got the most pedigree, but for them to win that as well was a really big thing for Chelsea. And I also think, look back now, the kits were just beautiful as well. Like fans really look back on those with a lot of fondness as well. And there was a lot of important, before Abramovich came in, like I said earlier, I think people don't actually realise that Terry and Lampard are pre Abramovich. So I think that the arrivals of those two are kind of so symbolic of the era as well. And it's kind of like the passing of the old guard that we mentioned earlier, and then the incoming of the new guard kind of set Chelsea up. And it's not like Abramovich came in. I think it's a common misconception, really, that people think that Chelsea were like a mid-table club, and Abramovich came in and they instantly went from like 10th to first. It was kind of Chelsea were a solid team before Abramovich took over. We were kind of, like I said earlier, I'd say we were at like kind of how Aston Villa are viewed now, like a kind of that kind of club who are still winning trophies and beating like the big teams. Like we beat Man United 5-0, I think, in the 2000 season. So I think that is a common misconception, really, that Abramovich came in and I mean, he did transform Chelsea, don't get me wrong. Like he spent crazy money, made them into a Premier League winning club. But I think there is this misconception that Abramovich transformed Chelsea from nothing into a title winning team. And I think that's wrong because, like I said to you, Chelsea had brilliant players before Abramovich and picked up trophies as well. That won silverware, that played in the Champions League, had a lot of pedigree, really. So I think but there's definitely a line in the sand between that era of Chelsea from the mid 90s to 2003 to then 2003 onwards, from when Abramovich gets in and he kind of completely revamps and changes Chelsea. And I also think really he's probably one of the most influential and transformative figures on the Premier League ever, because he's probably like the first big money owner that comes in. And then obviously after him, I think in 2008, City are then bought by the Abu Dhabi group.
Yeah, I think he may be the first foreign owner, if I'm
Yeah,
not
he was kind of like
mistaken.
the first foreign owner that kind of ripped up
Yeah.
the script and then kind of, like we said earlier, kind of broke the duopoly of Arsenal and Man United and spent this crazy money that no one had ever really spent before and kind of completely transformed the way that football was and that football was viewed, really. And yeah, he completely revamped it and changed it. And then has set kind of like set a structure and set a way of doing things for other people, which is like I said, isn't a very ethical or very liked or well received way of doing things. And then yeah, and I mean you see it now as his Abramovich's influence is still, I mean, Chelsea fans now, because of how much they dislike the new ownership model and the things, like Chelsea fans will still chant Roman Abramovich's name at away games, even though like he's never coming back because obviously of everything that's happened in the way that he just isn't coming back, and this new ownership is here to stay, and this new model's here to stay. But Chelsea fans are still like reminisce on that period. So yeah, I think his influence, he's definitely one of the most influential and transformative, for right and wrong reasons, I think is the most one of the most influential and transformative football owners and figures in the English game, really.
With that, I would like to thank you for your participation in this interview. All our respective contact information is listed on the blog and podcast uploads. So, Alex, thank you once again and hope to continue these discussions on football history. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you for having me as well. I always like the opportunity to chat about Chelsea, so thank you.
Thank you.